Between 1642 and 1646, England was torn apart by a bloody civil war, with the supporters of the king there fighting for honor and to keep the established social order of England intact. At the heart of the conflict was Parliament's inability to accept King Charles' policies. During the 1630s, his apparent determination to rule England without the assistance of Parliament, his introduction of all sorts of financial measures, and his support for high church religious practices aroused considerable alarm among Parliament. The more zealous Protestants or Puritans came to fear that Charles was pursuing a hidden agenda, that he planned to remove his people's rights or liberties and to restore England to the Catholic fold. When in 1637 Charles attempted to introduce a new form of prayer book in his northern kingdom of Scotland, a major rebellion erupted. The king did not have enough money to raise an army in order to quell the rebellion and was forced to summon a parliament. Yet the men who assembled at Westminster were unwilling to give the king the money he needed until their own grievances had been dealt with. The angry, disaffected members of Parliament seized political control and set about dismantling the instruments of the Charles rule. To many contemporaries, it seemed that the kingdom's political problems were solved, when in fact they were only just beginning. In late 1640, Charles I had faced a political elite which was almost wholly united against him. In late 1641, this was no longer the case. By this time, a split had emerged in Parliament, and in the country at large, between those who wished for further reform and those who felt that the recent changes had gone quite far enough. Friction was particularly apparent between religious conservatives, men and women who were happy with the Church of England as it had been established at the time of the Reformation, and more godly Protestants, those who considered the Church to be but half reformed, and were determined to rid it of the rags and patches of Rome. As time went by, religious traditionalists became increasingly alienated from the more radical spirits and turned to the king for support. Charles thus found himself with a swelling political constituency, and he made a bold attempt to seize back the political initiative. In January 1642, Charles strode into the Parliament House with a body of soldiers and demanded the persons of 5 MPs who were declared to be traitors. The men escaped, and the parliamentarians were outraged by his actions. The parliamentarians soon caused London to be in an uproar, and the king, fearing for his life, was forced to flee. War was now inevitable. Among the peerage and the greater gentry, a majority favored the king, because they felt bound to him by ties of personal loyalty and saw him as the chief guarantor of the established social order. One of the best definitions of the ideological division which lay at the heart of the Civil War was given by the Worcester clergyman Richard Baxter. Even though his views were tainted by parliamentarian propaganda, he stated, "The generality of the people, who were then called Puritans, precisians, religious persons," Baxter wrote, "those that used to talk of God and heaven and scripture and holiness adhered to the Parliament. And on the other side, those that were not so precise and strict against an oath or gaming or plays or drinking, nor troubled themselves so much about the matters of God and the world to come, adhered to the king." His views were quite obviously biased, since it was not that the Royalists were irreligious, but that they remained to a truer, more traditional form of Protestantism, one which was untainted by Puritan zeal. Nevertheless, Baxter's words convey an essential truth. Across the country as a whole, it was religion which ultimately divided the two parties. Puritans everywhere supported the Parliament. More conservative Protestants, together with the few Catholics, supported the king. In June 1646, the king's wartime capital, Oxford, was surrendered to the parliamentarian New Model Army. Charles fled in disguise and put himself under the protection of the Scots, but they soon handed him back to Parliament. 2 years later, the king was led out to the executioner's block and beheaded, and with the death of Charles I came the end of the Civil War.